Today, urbanism is synonymous with tall buildings. Because of their symbolic value, a great deal of attention is given to their most distinguishing characteristic, and that is how they meet the sky. And unfortunately, this can only be appreciated from a distance. Regardless of the height of a building, if one is concerned about the urban habitat, you have to be equally concerned or interested in whether or not buildings provide a positive experience at the street level. Because this is where the individual, whether it's the passerby or the building occupant, really comes to encounter the building. In architecture, it is clear that the perception of quality is not fixed. That tastes change with time. During the real estate boom that ended in the early 1990s, when postmodernism was fashionable, buildings were very often caricatures of earlier classically inspired buildings. Postmodernism high-rises were usually very solid, granite-clad objects inserted into the urban site without regard for context. They seem to be fortresses with a very clear separation between interior and exterior spaces. Postmodern buildings tried to recapture a sense of grandeur from the past. The visual language of these buildings was rooted in history and did very little to embrace contemporary life. Here are three examples of buildings in the early 90s in Chicago that were completed at that time, just at the end of that real estate crisis. 10 years later, following the dot-com boom, the revolution in technology and communications transformed our view of the world. The infatuation with the past was replaced by the wonder of what the future would bring. The tools of business as well as everyday life changed. Technology was no longer a threat to our individuality. It liberated us and became rooted in our everyday lives. As technology became more user-friendly, it became easier to accept the design of objects that were very technical in appearance, whether it was a cell phone, a computer, a TV, or a building. During that period, the word transparency became common and was used in a very positive way to describe full disclosure. Transparency provided a sense of security as one is aware or can see what's going on. Transparency was embraced in business, in government, and eventually in buildings. Advances in glass technology made it possible to use glass in ways that were previously inconceivable. The appeal of the Apple stores is one of the best examples. Minimal glass enclosures, glass columns, glass stairs, glass elevator shafts. In architecture, contemporary modernism is universally embraced by almost everyone now, and postmodernism is really clearly anachronistic and a thing of the past. I'm going to start out talking about three office buildings that we did in Chicago. Each one is a little over 1 million square feet, or 120,000 square meters is the smallest, and 150,000 square meters is the largest. These are, as you can see, not the tallest buildings in Chicago. And the situation in the US is where the developers have to, everything is really a investment venture. They're relying on outside funds to finance these buildings. They have to be pre-leased by approximately at least 50% in order to get the money to start construction. And in order to pre-lease a 100,000 square meter building, usually it requires a single tenant approximately half that size. And those tenants are very interested in the cost and the efficiency. So the designs that can launch these buildings have to be designs that are very efficient and economical. And So it's considerably different than the projects that we're doing in China and in the Middle East, where there's the thought of pre-leasing is still somewhere out in the future. These three buildings are more or less on the same street, Wacker Drive, which is the prime business address in the city. The first building that we did was UBS Building, which was about 150,000 square meters. And I think, as you can see, we did pay some attention to the top of the building, but the most important thing, in a way that we had to work with, realizing it had to be very efficient and economical, had a strong technological backbone, had to have many amenities, then further down the line, the architecture became a part of it. In this case, here's the lobby of the building, where we used a cable-supported glass wall with low iron glass, non-reflective coating, and I think you can see that there's very little separation between the inside and the outside of the building. The building is located on a main path to the train stations. So along that street, there are 200,000 people going east in the morning and west in the afternoon. The building lobby is on the south side of the core with entries here and here. The core, entry to a restaurant, and then a bank. This gives you an idea of the height of the building. Push the wrong button. Once again, a view of the interior of the building. These mounds, which I'll talk about in a minute. The cable wall. Very much the idea of the building, that there was very little separation between the interior of the building when you're in the inside looking out or the outside looking in. I think you can see there's very little separation between the interior and the exterior. These mounds are almost like sculptural devices, a combination of planters and seating elements. This was completed about a year after 9/11, and when all the buildings started to have precast concrete barricades, and we had the good fortune we could say that we planned it, but we didn't. But these made very, very effective barriers from the street. I think you can also see that this is along that passage, that these mounds created sort of a visual wall along the street that separated the pedestrian area from the street. And so, in spite of the fact that it was all very horizontal, there was sort of a spatial aspect to it. This is a section through one of the planters. This is a combination. I think you can see the lighting. What's on the interior is a part of the exterior. There's that walkway to the back and forth to the train station, and then the mounds. The next building that I'm going to talk about is a block away on 1 South Wacker. The lead tenant on the first building was a UBS, and the building was very successful. The next big tenant in the market that all the developers were competing for was Deloitte. And when they were asked, Deloitte, what kind of building are you looking for? Fortunately, they said, well, we're looking for a building similar to 1 South Wacker. So this is the site situation. It is a very small site that's hemmed in on 2 sides. And so it was, the UBS was open on 3 sides and very prominent within the city. This was much more restricted site. So it's kind of a reach to see how were we going to do something that had the same kind of impact that UBS did. The developer asked us to consider a scheme where we would take the first 12 floors, raise the building up, and put them up on the top with the idea of opening up the ground plane. We looked at 3 different ways to do this. One was 8 columns in a core, one was 4 columns in a core, and the scheme, which in the beginning we thought was a throwaway, was just 1 core, everything cantilevered off the core. And this site had actually been previously the site of a building called the USG Building, and it had been demolished, but the caissons were there, the foundation walls were there, and so forth. And so we found that by building the building, by making it a core-supported building, that we didn't have to do any excavation or foundation work, that we could add enough caissons so that the whole building could be supported off the core, and that by diverting all of the perimeter column loads into the core, the building actually turned out to be what we thought was a throwaway, was very efficient. And Chicago has a tradition with major works of art in the public spaces, so the developer had a competition, and we had 3 world-class architects submit proposals for the plaza, and Oliver Eliasson was the winner. This is the site. The white area was what was enclosed. Here's the core, 3 elevator banks. So it was very compact. And Oliver's scheme was a series of walls with sort of a coiled stainless steel aspect to it, which made it all very open. I think it would have been very interesting. Here you can see it kind of in the context and sort of the scale of it. At least the concept for the lobby enclosure. And I think a feeling of what the streetscape would have been like. This building occupied on the upper floors roughly 95% of the site. At the same time, when you're in the streetscape, at least I think as proposed here, it felt very open and spacious. The developer, the original concepts, as you can see, we started to develop it. The developer was getting more and more and more confident. The market was very responsive. And then that eventful day when people started looking at high-rise buildings in a completely different way. So it was back to the drawing boards. Deloitte, once again, was still the prime tenant. They needed space. They didn't feel comfortable about this as an idea, and they wanted a much lower building. So in spite of the fact that this made a more massive core and all the columns would have been further away from the street and probably the easiest building to defend, we pursued a course that was a little more conservative. As we moved along, we did try to come back with the idea, instead of having space down here, that how could we move the office space further up in the building? And we came up with the idea of putting parking in the lower 8 floors. So here's the building on the skyline. Once again, not really in a position to compete with Sears or the AT&T building, but you see it on the, as it is with Wacker and Monroe. And so the building, these floors are actually parking floors. Here's the entry to the parking garage. Within the parking levels, we transferred the columns to a single column or combined columns. So these columns then have roughly an 80-foot lease span. I think you can see there's sort of certain energy in terms of the graphics. Here's a plan of the drive going up into the parking area, which I'll show you in a minute as it wraps around. And that circular motion kind of generated the graphics for the building. That this was a lobby or a restaurant. One of the things the developer was very keen on is maintaining a very business-like aesthetic to the building, and didn't want the food and beverage service to influence the appearance of the lobby. Here is a section of the building. The parking ramp goes in, round, up, and these are the parking levels. the height of the lobby is about 15 meters at the maximum point, and then it goes down as it moves around. Here, once again, I think you can see the columns being transferred in. This is the ground plane. We certainly didn't lose interest in the skyline, but the most distinctive feature about the building, I think, is really the ground plane. And once again, I think there's very little separation between the interior. The streetscape is part of the lobby is part of the streetscape. 80-foot columns. Actually, this is a vertical cable wall with non-reflective coating, low iron glass. Each one of these cables has approximately 60,000 pounds of force, meaning you could hang 10 of the heaviest Mercedes cars on those cables. We use that aesthetic of the ramp pretty much throughout the project. Another example of not having really a barrier between the inside and the outside of the building. The cores, which you can't really see here, are very textured. It's a white sponda from Italy, Rosa Verona, that is actually laid exactly as it was in the ground, so that as they took the blocks out and slabbed it, they put it back in the wall. So that's why you see it's all continuously matched. The next building that we worked on, once again, was the same developer. It was 155 North Wacker. They wanted to work a similar approach. At this point, though, the market was getting very difficult. The building was very challenged in terms of the budget. We had to make a lot of changes as we went. We were able to maintain, I think, at least the essence of the idea at the streetscape. In this case, it's a little bit different. There's where UBS, the walkway was outside the building. This is one block north, and once again, this is a main path to the train station, and so there's a large arcade, a small city park, which was really part of the development. The arcade, entry to the building, entry to the elevator vestibule. So as you're waiting for the elevator, you're really as much a part of the streetscape as if you were outside. Elevation directly related to the building, but maybe a little bigger area. The lighting is done in such a way, this is actually the enclosure of the building, so the lighting actually carries in. The walls start on the outside and go in the end, and once again, it's a similar aspect that there's very little division between the exterior and the interior of the building. This was also another cable wall, and unfortunately the glass does still have a certain materiality, and so there is a slight change, but I think that the idea of the building flowing from the inside out and outside in is still very strong. The columns are well expressed, the core expressed, triangular columns in this case, matching the triangular grid on the ceiling and the floor. Then moving to another part of the world, Abu Dhabi, there was a competition for Mubadala, sponsored a competition. They were developing this island. This is the way the island looked when we started. They had developed a master plan for the island, which was to be mixed use. This was going to be the business center. This eventually became where Cleveland Clinic went and other aspects of it. But this is the area that we were primarily concerned with. And as I said, this is the way the building, the site looked when we started. Mubadala was very interested in having this project, or the business, or the office center, to be something that would really invigorate and anchor this whole development as the new downtown for Abu Dhabi. It was 4 office buildings and the Abu Dhabi Stock Exchange. Their goal was that the building should be iconic. And in an area where the Burj Dubai and Burj Al Arab, these were going to be 20-story buildings, 4-story stock exchange. So not really the ingredients for an iconic building. So as we looked at it, we, instead of having the buildings on the ground, we looked into the possibility of raising them up, which made them a little bit higher. It also cleared the ground plane. So this would have been the footprint of those buildings projected onto the site, represented about 36% of the area. As we raised it, and the blue area is what's enclosed, everything else is really a glass net wall. So the enclosed space, which is the yellow, is 16%, but the core area, the solid area, is less than 6%. So it makes the buildings feel very open in an area where shading is, any kind of shading you can do is really beneficial. So you enter the building, you enter the cores from these two, and enter from this side, and then it's exposed to the outside. Here's a view of the building in terms of the concept. The stock exchange was lifted up. Previously, the ground was going to be across here, so we moved it, circled it so that instead of the building being 4 stories, which would have been here, we lifted it up. I think this was 20 meters and then up another 30 meters. So it made the markings of something that was iconic. This is a construction shot. It's still, the project will be pretty much done by the end of the year. This looks not very inviting because you've got 2 years of sand. These core wall, or these stems on each side were enclosed with a double glass wall. The return air from the office goes up, acts for a kind of a thermospatil effect to reduce the heat gain in these areas. These are horizontal louvers that track with the sun. This is Martha Schwartz was brought in to do the landscaping and did mounds, kind of somewhat similar to what we did on 1 North Wacker. Once again, these are construction shots, not very appealing in some ways, but I think you can see there's very little difference between the inside and the outside of the buildings. This is approximately about a 10-story net wall. These trees were just put in, so they look a little rugged, but I think they look very good right now. This is one of the lobby side, which I think has really the feeling of being outside. This is, once again, a construction shot, but an idea of, I think it comes close to providing the iconic image that Mubadala was looking for. So these are not the same kind of ground planes that you can do with the ultra-high building, but was a response for at least these kind of buildings, that developer-type buildings that are being done in the U.S. right now. Thank you.